They say you can't outrun chaos, you can only delay it. I thought I'd finally left mine behind the day I moved to Maple Hollow Estates, but the night 3 men in fake uniforms kicked in my door, I learned how wrong I was. The sound still lives somewhere in the back of my skull, a hard, splintering crack followed by the kind of silence that feels alive, listening, and then the voice, calm, cold, rehearsed. HOA compliance inspection. Step aside, sir. In that moment, my world split clean in two. On one side, the quiet life I'd built, the green lawn, the porch light, my daughter asleep upstairs. On the other, a darkness that didn't belong in neighborhoods like this. Perfect lawns, painted mailboxes, smiles that hid too much. Maple Hollow was supposed to be peace, but that night, peace came wearing a badge that wasn't real. I should have seen it coming. The warnings were there, woven into every uneasy smile, every shadow that lingered too long at the end of the cul-de-sac. The security patrols that seemed to appear out of nowhere. The letters, perfectly typed, that arrived without names but demanded obedience. And the neighbors, people I barely knew, whispering that it was all for our safety. Safety from what? The night they came, I realized this wasn't about rules or fences or trash cans left out too long. It was about control. Someone wanted to make this neighborhood a cage, and they were using the illusion of authority to do it. What they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that I'd spent 15 years wearing a real badge, and I recognized the look in their eyes, that thin line between confidence and fear. The kind of fear that only shows up when someone knows they're about to make a mistake. By the time the police lights turned the rain into streaks of red and blue, it was already too late for them. But it didn't end there. Because when masks fall, what's underneath isn't always human. So ask yourself this. What happens when the people who claim to protect your neighborhood are the very ones tearing it apart from the inside? Maple Hollow Estates wasn't just a neighborhood. It was an image, crafted with precision. Every hedge trimmed at the same height, every mailbox painted the same shade of colonial white. The streets curved in soft, deliberate arcs, meant to look natural, but you could feel the planning underneath. The sidewalks were wide enough for strollers and joggers, the kind of place where people waved, whether they knew you or not. It was peace, packaged and sold under the illusion of control. When I first drove through the entrance past the brick monument sign with its gold lettering and perfectly arranged seasonal flowers, I felt something. I hadn't in years. Stillness. The kind that doesn't hum with sirens or smell like asphalt after a car fire. I'd left Houston behind with its noise and ghosts, chasing something simple for me and my daughter, Emily. 13 years old, braces, earbuds always in, and a heart too big for her age. She said Maple Hollow smelled like safety. I wanted to believe her. Our house sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, one of those 2-story models with a porch swing that came standard. It wasn't big, but it was enough. 3 bedrooms, a tidy yard, a small patch of woods behind the fence. On the first morning after we moved in, I brewed coffee, stepped out onto the porch, and watched the sun rise over the row of pastel rooftops. For a few seconds, it felt like normal life, like the noise in my head had finally gone quiet. Neighbors trickled by in waves that first week. Tom Keller, retired history teacher, lived next door. He carried the kind of friendliness that came from decades of grading essays and breaking up teenage arguments. His wife, Helen, made banana bread that smelled like nostalgia. Across the street was Mrs. Whitaker, 82, widowed, her front yard a shrine of ceramic gnomes and bird feeders. And then there was Greg Stanton, HOA president, self-declared guardian of Maple Hollow's standards. Greg was the kind of man who turned rules into religion. Early 50s, sharp silver hair, the permanent tan of someone who golfed more than he worked. He introduced himself with the confidence of a CEO and the warmth of a contract. "We take pride in this community," he said, handing me a welcome packet thicker than a small-town phone book. Inside were bylaws, compliance codes, parking restrictions, and a newsletter titled The Hollow Herald. I smiled politely, pretending not to notice how his eyes skimmed over my truck, my boots, and the faint scuffs on the driveway from moving boxes. He gave off the kind of energy you can't mistake, the need to be in charge, disguised as civic duty. Behind him stood two board members, Frank Mercer, mid-40s, balding, glasses that never stayed clean, and Janet Wells, a sharp-featured woman in her early 50s who wore authority like a tailored jacket. Janet's smile was professional, but her eyes cataloged everything. Every lawn, every paint color, every unapproved modification. That first week, they made it clear how things worked. The HOA wasn't just about keeping the neighborhood beautiful. It was about keeping it uniform. Driveways clear after 10 p.m. Trash cans must be rolled back within 20 minutes of pickup. Grass no higher than 2 inches. No vehicles with visible mechanical defects allowed overnight. The language was polite, but the intent wasn't. It was control, dressed as community. I didn't mind rules. Years as a police sergeant had taught me that structure keeps chaos out. But even then, something about Greg's tone stuck with me. The way he said, "We like to handle things internally." Like the outside world wasn't welcome here. Days passed easy at first. I fixed a loose fence post, helped Tom install a new mailbox, grilled burgers in the backyard while Emily chased fireflies. We found a rhythm: quiet mornings, school runs, dinner at the table. Sometimes I'd sit out front and just listen, sprinklers ticking, dogs barking in the distance, kids shouting over basketball hoops. It was the sound of normal, but normal has cracks if you know where to look. The first one showed up on a Tuesday. I came home from a grocery run to find a folded notice taped to my door. Friendly reminder, front yard ornamentation policy, Section 3B violation. I frowned. The so-called violation was a small wooden cross Emily had staked near the flower bed, painted blue and white. It wasn't even visible from the street unless you looked hard. I thought it was a mistake. At the next HOA meeting, I brought it up. The clubhouse was a glass-walled room with glossy floors and chairs that squeaked when you shifted. Greg sat at the head of the table like a judge. The rest of the board flanked him, sipping bottled water in unison. Section 3B prohibits unapproved decorative structures in front-facing yards, Greg explained, tone measured, eyes cool. We're not singling anyone out. Just maintaining standards? It's a 12-inch cross, I said. My daughter made it, Janet smiled thinly. We understand, Mr. O'Brien, but consistency is important. Exceptions create problems, I almost laughed. Consistency, that's what they called it. But around the table, a few other residents avoided my gaze, shifting in their seats. One woman, a nurse I'd seen walking her dog, murmured, "They cited me for a bird bath." Another added, "I had to repaint my mailbox post. Wrong shade of white." Greg's gavel hit the table gently. "We appreciate community feedback," he said. Meeting adjourned. That night I tossed the notice in the trash. But I didn't forget. Over the next few weeks, more of those friendly reminders started appearing. One for improperly stored garden tools, another for visible refuse container. Once I found Greg's black SUV idling at the end of the street, headlights off. He wasn't breaking any laws, just watching. Then came the patrols. It started subtly. A small golf cart marked HOA Security began circling the neighborhood after dusk. 3 men inside, wearing black polos with a silver crest I didn't recognize. They didn't wave, didn't speak, just shone spotlights across driveways. Tom said it was a new Community Watch initiative, but when I asked who authorized it, he shrugged. Probably Greg. He said something about tightening safety protocols. I checked the bylaws that night, no mention of any security program. The next morning, Emily asked, "Why do those guys keep driving by our house?" "They're just making rounds," I said. But I could see her unease. She started locking her bedroom door at night. By the second month, tension hummed beneath the surface of Maple Hollow's perfect lawns. A neighbor's trash bin went missing, then reappeared with a warning label attached. Someone's tire got slashed. A row of mailboxes was found dented one morning, and rumors spread that it was kids. But the kids didn't drive SUVs with tinted windows. At the next board meeting, attendance had doubled. Residents whispered complaints, exchanged uneasy glances. When Greg entered, the room fell silent. "There's been some vandalism," he announced smoothly, "and unauthorized visitors after dark. That's why our enforcement division is stepping up patrols." "For your safety." "Enforcement division?" I asked. "That's not in the bylaws." He smiled the way politicians do when they're caught and don't care. "It's a pilot program, temporary, necessary," the crowd murmured. Janet added. "If you're following the rules, you have nothing to worry about." I felt something shift then. The words were too practiced, too clean. After that, the feeling of being watched became constant. The hum of that golf cart. The glint of headlights just beyond the corner. I noticed cameras sprouting on streetlights, tiny black domes that hadn't been there before. When I asked Greg about them, he said they were to deter crime. But Maple Hollow didn't have crime, at least not the kind you could see. One night I found a new notice on my door. Section 9B violation, unauthorized structure. My pulse quickened. Section 9B didn't exist. I checked twice, and the letterhead, something about it looked off. The HOA seal was smudged, the font slightly wrong, like someone had copied it. The next day I called the HOA office. The secretary hesitated before answering. "Sir, there is no Section 9B, and we don't issue violations electronically." That's when I realized this wasn't just overreach. Someone was faking authority, using the HOA as a weapon, but I didn't tell Emily, not yet. I still wanted to believe it was just a misunderstanding, that Greg was being overzealous, not malicious. Then Mrs. Whitaker's house went dark. Her gnomes disappeared overnight. Her blinds stayed shut. Tom said she'd gone to visit family, but no one had seen her leave. Her porch light, the one that always stayed on, burned out 2 nights later. The neighborhood started to change after that. Smiles grew thinner. Conversation stopped when you got too close. The same golf cart now had 2 different drivers, both younger, both armed with radios. I started keeping notes, license plates, times, faces. Old habits from the force kicked in, and as I watched, a pattern began to form. The violations always landed on the same kinds of people: widows, single parents, retirees. People who didn't fight back. Greg's SUV became a constant presence, always near when something happened, never when it mattered. Once I caught him talking quietly to one of the security men behind the clubhouse. Their body language wasn't friendly. That night, I told myself the same thing I'd told rookies for years. Coincidence is just order you haven't recognized yet. The next morning, a package arrived. No return address. Inside, a printed copy of my police record and a single note in red ink. "Stay compliant." For the first time in years, my hands shook. I checked the windows twice that night, then 3 times. Emily slept with her lamp on. I sat on the porch watching the rain shimmer on the street, waiting for that golf cart to come humming back. Maple Hollow looked the same, immaculate, peaceful, rehearsed. But beneath that calm, something had changed. The quiet no longer felt safe. It felt staged, like the whole neighborhood was holding its breath, waiting for the next knock. And deep down, I knew it was coming, because peace like this never lasts. Not when the people enforcing it have forgotten what it means. The first real fight came with the grass. It sounds ridiculous to say now, but that's how it started, over a few uneven patches of grass on the side of my driveway. It had been raining on and off for 2 weeks, the kind of sticky early summer drizzle that turns soil into soup and makes mowing nearly impossible. I was waiting for the ground to dry out, but apparently Greg Stanton wasn't waiting for anything. When I came home from work that Friday, a bright orange notice fluttered against my front door like a warning flag. Violation notice, property maintenance failure, lawn height exceeds. Acceptable limit, 2.25 inches. It came with a $75 fine and a printed photo of my yard, taken from what looked like street level. The timestamp was 6:17 a.m. At first I laughed. It was absurd, so absurd it couldn't be real. But then I noticed the seal, embossed perfectly this time, the signature scrawled in Greg's looping cursive. This wasn't a prank. This was official, I called him that evening. He picked up on the second ring, his voice perfectly calm, professional, and hollow. "Greg," I said, "you fined me $75 because my grass grew 2 inches. "Not quite, Daniel," he replied, his tone sliding into that smug patience that people like him use to hide control. "You were informed in the welcome packet that all residents must maintain visual harmony in accordance with Section 4C. The grass measurement is a standard." "A standard?" I snapped. "You came to my property at 6 in the morning to measure my grass." "I didn't personally," he said smoothly. The compliance officer did. Who's the compliance officer? Information on enforcement personnel is not public record. That was when the call went dead. The next day, a neighbor stopped by, Tracy, a woman who lived 3 doors down. She was polite but visibly uncomfortable, clutching a clipboard against her chest. "Hey," she said, "Greg asked me to remind you about the new landscaping review next week. They're auditing everyone's front yards." "Landscaping review?" I asked. "Since when?" She sighed. "Since the meeting last night. They said too many people were lowering the property standard." She didn't meet my eyes when she left. The following week, I received 3 more notices. One for leaving my trash can visible for an extended duration. It was out for 40 minutes. One for a non-conforming driveway stain, oil from an old lawnmower leak, and one, incredibly, for unauthorized exterior ornamentation, a wind chime Emily had hung on the porch. Each fine came with a photo. Each photo taken closer to the house. That was when I realized someone was coming onto my property when I wasn't home. I set up a small motion-activated camera by the porch, the kind I'd used before when I was on the force. 2 nights later, I caught him. Frank Mercer, the HOA treasurer, clipboard in hand, flashlight beam slicing through the dark. He leaned down, took pictures of the porch, the mailbox, even the flower pots. Then he looked directly into the camera and smirked before walking off. I showed the footage to Greg the next morning. He didn't flinch. "Frank was conducting a property review," he said. "As per policy." "He trespassed," I said flatly. Greg leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Only if you believe property boundaries supersede community welfare." That was the moment I understood what I was really dealing with. Over the next month, the harassment spread like a virus. My mail began arriving late, or not at all. Packages disappeared. Someone left a printed copy of the bylaws in my mailbox, every paragraph about penalties highlighted in yellow. My front gate latch was broken one morning. Then the neighborhood Facebook group, Maple Hollow Families, started filling with posts about non-compliant residents bringing down values. They didn't mention my name. They didn't have to. One morning, I went outside to find someone had sprayed "Follow the Rules" in chalk across my driveway. Emily saw it before I did. She went quiet, pressing her lips together, pretending not to care. But I saw the way her hands trembled as she picked up her backpack for school. I started documenting everything: violations, messages, photos, phone calls. Old instincts kicked in: evidence, timeline, motive. But as I gathered proof, the HOA doubled down. They started citing me for things that weren't even visible from the street, like the color of my back fence or a potential drainage issue behind my garage. It was relentless, almost mechanical, like they wanted to break me down piece by piece. And then came the letter, certified mail, stamped in red. Final notice, property line pending, accrued fines, and non-compliance. Total. Why no 425s? My stomach dropped. I read it twice, then a third time. It was signed not by Greg, but by Janet Wells, the woman I'd seen taking notes at every meeting, the one who smiled too politely. I called her immediately. "Janet," I said, trying to stay calm, "this is a mistake. You can't file a lien on a property over landscaping fines." "Oh, we can," she said softly. "Section 11 grants the board authority to enforce compliance through financial remedy." "Section 11 doesn't mention liens." A pause. "Then you should read the revised addendum." "What addendum?" She hung up. The next day, a man in a blue blazer came to my door with a clipboard. "Mr. O'Brien?" "Yeah, I'm here to perform a compliance inspection on behalf of the Maple Hollow Association." "You have a warrant?" He blinked. "Sir, this is private property regulation, not law enforcement." "Then you can leave." He hesitated, then turned and walked off, but not before snapping a photo of my face. That night, I drove past Greg's house. His lights were on. Through the window, I could see him and Frank laughing over drinks. Papers were spread across the table between them. I knew what I was looking at before I admitted it to myself. This wasn't about rules anymore. This was about power. Word spread that the HOA had begun reassessing everyone's dues. Several neighbors, people I'd spoken with at barbecues and mailbox chats, started avoiding me. Tom Keller stopped waving. Helen no longer brought banana bread. Only Mrs. Patel from 2 streets over dared to speak when I saw her at the store. They did the same thing to the Rosens, she whispered. Last year. Fined them until they sold. Said their shutters were the wrong shade of beige. What happened to them? They moved. Greg bought the house through a company in his wife's name. Sold it a month later for $50,000 more. That was the moment everything clicked. The fines, the liens, the revised bylaws. It wasn't about maintaining property value. It was about acquiring it. I started digging. The county records showed that 3 homes in the past 2 years had gone through foreclosure after HOA liens. All 3 had been bought by shell companies tied to Greg's consulting firm. 2 had been resold at a markup. One, the Rosens, was still listed as under maintenance. I called the county clerk. Has anyone investigated this HOA? She sighed. Maple Hollow? You're not the first to ask. They're careful. Everything looks legal on paper. That night, I printed every document I had, laid them across my kitchen table, and stared until the ink blurred. I was sitting in the middle of something organized, deliberate, and rotten to its core. But even knowing that, I wasn't prepared for what they'd do next. One morning, I woke to a thud outside. When I opened the door, I saw Greg, 2 security men, and a man in a neon vest standing on my lawn. The man was posting a large laminated sign into the ground, "Property under HOA review." "What the hell is this?" I asked. Greg smiled faintly. "We've received multiple complaints regarding safety hazards on your property." "Safety hazards?" "The fence, the driveway, possibly mold near your siding. It's all being evaluated." "Evaluated by who?" "The association." "You don't have the right—" "Oh, Daniel," he interrupted, his voice soft and syrupy. "You'd be surprised what rights you gave up when you signed that covenant." Neighbors had started gathering by then, watching, whispering. I saw Tracy standing at the corner, biting her lip. Tom pretended to water his lawn. Greg adjusted his tie and said, "Of course, you can contest this at the next meeting. But until then, we advise cooperation." The sign stayed there for days. Then the real mail stopped coming entirely. My electric bill arrived 3 weeks late. The HOA claimed it had nothing to do with them, but my utilities were handled through their community services platform. When I called to complain, I was placed on hold for 47 minutes before someone told me, "We'll note your concern." It became a slow siege. The grass fine turned into a $200 non-compliance surcharge, then a $500 administrative fee. When I refused to pay, they tacked on processing penalties. The total, $2,310. That same week, I came home to find a lockbox installed on my water meter. I stood there, staring at the metal clamp and the small red tag with the HOA logo. I wanted to rip it off right there, but Emily came outside holding her backpack, her voice small. "Dad, are we in trouble?" I forced a smile I didn't feel. "Not yet, sweetheart." That night, I got a call from an unknown number. When I answered, there was silence at first. Then the sound of static, followed by Greg's voice. "You could have just paid the fines, Daniel. You could have left me alone." A chuckle. "Where's the fun in that?" The line went dead. After that, everything accelerated. Notices turned into certified letters. Fines became threats of foreclosure. A rumor began circulating online that I was unstable. Someone even sent an anonymous complaint to Child Protective Services. False? Of course, but enough to get a home visit. When the caseworker left, Emily cried in her room for an hour. That was when something inside me hardened. The next morning, I drove to the county courthouse and filed a complaint against the HOA for harassment and illegal property intrusion. I didn't expect it to go anywhere. It didn't, but it put them on notice that I wasn't backing down. Then I began gathering allies, a handful of neighbors, Tracy, Mrs. Patel, even old Tom had grown uneasy. Their own fines were piling up too. We started meeting in secret at the diner off the highway. Each of them had a story. Janet had threatened Tracy with non-renewal of access privileges for having a backyard trampoline. Tom had been fined $400 because his American flag wasn't appropriately displayed. We compared letters, emails, timestamps. The same phrases repeated: visual harmony, community preservation. Section 11 enforcement, all tied to the same three signatures: Greg, Janet, and Frank. It wasn't incompetence, it was a racket. I contacted a local reporter, a woman named Alicia Ward, who'd written about predatory HOAs before. When I told her Maple Hollow's story, she paused and said, "You have proof? More than you think." We set a meeting for the following Thursday, but 2 days before that meeting, my house was vandalized. It happened after midnight. Emily woke me up, whispering that she heard voices outside. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped onto the porch. Someone had egged the windows, slashed the porch swing ropes, and spray-painted a single word on my garage door: comply. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, Greg was already there, standing with his arms crossed. "Looks like vandalism," he said calmly. "Shame, really. Things like this can lower property values." "You did this," I said. He smirked. "Prove it." The officer filed a report, but nothing came of it. There were no cameras. Someone had cut the wires on mine. When Alicia came by later that week, she took one look at the sign still on my lawn and said, "You're not the first, but you might be the one who stops them." She asked for copies of everything: fines, letters, footage, even that fake Section 9B notice. I gave it all. A week later, her story went live. The HOA that went too far. Inside Maple Hollow's culture of control. It spread fast. Local Facebook groups, then citywide news. Residents started talking, whispering, comparing experiences. By the weekend, the HOA's next meeting was packed. Greg walked in as if nothing had happened, chin high, suit crisp. But the energy was different this time. People weren't quiet. They were angry. When I stood up to speak, the room went still. I laid out every piece of evidence on the table: the fake violations, the recorded calls, the liens, the shell companies. Greg tried to interrupt, but for the first time, no one listened to him. Janet shifted uncomfortably. Frank wouldn't look at me, and just as I thought the tide might finally turn, Greg leaned forward and smiled that same cold, confident smile. "You think this ends here?" he said softly. "Why wouldn't it?" I asked. "Because you're still outnumbered." That night, I found another notice taped to my door. It wasn't from the HOA, it was from a law firm. Notice of intent to foreclose. Outstanding balance, $5,170. In the dark, the paper fluttered against my doorframe, and all I could think was how something as small as a blade of grass had turned into a war. But wars don't end with warnings. They end with lines drawn, and I was done playing by their rules. And deep down, I knew what was coming next would be the breaking point. Because if Maple Hollow wanted a fight, they were about to get one. It started at 5:42 a.m., the sound of metal clanging against concrete, the thud of heavy boots on my driveway. At first, I thought it was a dream. Then came the sharp rap on my front door, 3 quick knocks that didn't belong in that early quiet. I got up, heart pounding, and looked through the peephole. They were there, 3 men in dark jackets with Maple Hollow Enforcement printed across the back in bold white letters. Behind them stood Greg Stanton, immaculate as ever, his navy suit pressed, tie perfectly knotted, that same smug calm frozen on his face. I opened the door halfway. "What do you think you're doing?" Greg smiled faintly, holding up a clipboard. "Property repossession inspection. As per lien authorization filed last week. You have no legal right to—" "Actually, we do," he cut in smoothly. "You've ignored multiple notices, Daniel. You've accrued over $6,000 in unpaid fees, penalties, and processing costs. Under the association's covenant, your property is now under review for reclamation." I stepped outside. The sky was still gray, dawn breaking behind a thin layer of fog. My front yard, the same one I'd mowed, trimmed, and fought for, looked foreign with those men standing on it, one holding a camera, another hammering a stake into the ground, with a bright red sign that read, "Foreclosure pending." Emily appeared at the top of the stairs behind me, sleepy-eyed and confused. "Dad, what's happening?" "Go back inside, sweetheart," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Greg's eyes flicked toward her. "It's unfortunate your daughter has to witness this, Daniel. But maybe now you'll understand the importance of compliance." That was it. Something inside me broke. "You crossed the line," I said quietly. Greg tilted his head. You crossed it first. I took a step closer. You've been trespassing, harassing, and manipulating this entire neighborhood. You think nobody's been watching?" His confidence faltered just for a second. "You have no proof," I smiled. "I have everything." I walked back inside, leaving the door open. When I came back out, I was holding a folder, thick, overflowing with documents, photos, and signed witness statements. Alicia, the reporter, had told me to wait. She'd said the story needed one more push, one more spark. I figured this would do it. I held the folder up. Every fake fine, every manipulated bylaw, every home you stole through those shell companies. You think I didn't trace the LLCs? You think I didn't find your wife's name on the deed transfers? Greg's face went pale just slightly, then tightened again. You're bluffing. I sent copies to the county auditor, to the local paper, and to the Attorney General's office. A flicker of panic crossed his face before he turned sharply to the men beside him. "Continue your inspection." One of them hesitated. "Mr. Stanton, maybe we should—" "Now," Greg snapped. But before they could move, 2 police cruisers rolled up at the end of the street, lights flashing silently. Greg turned, surprise breaking through the mask. I didn't move. I'd called them 30 minutes earlier, right after the anonymous tip I'd sent from Alicia's office went public. The officers stepped out, their expressions calm but alert. "Morning, folks," one of them said. "We received reports of an unauthorized property seizure." Greg adjusted his tie. "This is a civil matter. HOA business." "Then you won't mind showing your court order," the officer said evenly. Greg opened his mouth, then closed it. I handed the officer a copy of the lien paperwork. "It's forged," I said. "Compare the signature on the notary line. The county's records show that notary's license expired last year." The officer looked down, then back at Greg. "Sir, is this your signature?" Greg didn't answer. "Sir, it's—" "An administrative mistake," Greg stammered. "I can explain." "Step aside," the officer said. By now the neighbors had started to gather. Doors cracked open, blinds lifted. Tracy was on her porch, phone in hand, filming. Frank Mercer appeared halfway down the street, frozen. Janet Wells peeked from behind a car, pale as chalk. Greg turned to me, his calm veneer cracking. "You think this will stop me? You think one article, one set of lies will undo years of work?" I took a step forward, lowering my voice so only he could hear. "Not one article. 4. Alicia's been busy." He blinked. "Turns out she dug into more than Maple Hollow. There are 6 other HOAs tied to your consulting firm. Same pattern. Fake fines, shell companies, forced sales. She's sending everything to the State Fraud Division today." For the first time, Greg looked scared. Not angry, not annoyed, scared. The officers stepped between us. "Sir, we're going to need you to come with us for questioning. This is harassment." Greg barked. "You can't—" The officer cut him off. "You forged official documents, Mr. Stanton. You extorted residents. You obstructed property rights. You're done." And just like that, the man who had controlled every aspect of this neighborhood, the man who thought he could fine me into submission, was led away in handcuffs. His polished shoes splashing in the shallow puddles from last night's rain, the crowd murmured. Some filmed. Some just watched in stunned silence. Mrs. Walker was crying quietly near her mailbox. As the police car pulled away, I felt a weight lift off my chest that I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. But relief wasn't the only thing that came. There was grief, too. Grief for the months of tension, the nights Emily cried herself to sleep, the friendships destroyed by fear. The next few days were chaos. Reporters showed up. News vans parked along Maple Hollow Drive. The HOA office was locked down, its glass walls plastered with paper notices from the state. Alicia's expose aired on local TV that Friday night. The opening shot was my street, my house, that red foreclosure sign still stuck in the ground. The headline read, "Power, Profit, and HOA Corruption, the Maple Hollow Investigation." It was surreal watching it play out, every lie unraveling in public view. They showed the fake fines, the doctored addendums, the shell company transfers. Then they showed Greg's arrest footage, him being walked to the squad car, face pale, eyes empty. But what hit hardest wasn't the footage. It was the interviews, neighbors speaking up one after another. Tracy, Tom, Mrs. Patel, even Frank. He admitted he'd been pressured into compliance, promised kickbacks for extra diligence. By the end of the broadcast, Maple Hollow's reputation was shredded. The HOA board resigned en masse within 48 hours. The state opened an investigation into 8 other associations, and yet, despite all the noise, all the vindication, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. Not yet. 2 nights later, I got an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "You should have left it alone." The message was short. "You think Greg was the top? He wasn't. No name. No signature." For a second, I felt that old chill again, the one from the first violation notice, the first knock on the door. Then I closed the laptop and walked outside. It was raining lightly, the street shimmering in the soft glow of the streetlights. The red foreclosure sign still stood in my lawn, faded now, edges curling. I pulled it up, snapped it in half, and dropped it into the trash can. The sound was small, but it felt like a gunshot in the quiet. A few days later, the neighborhood gathered for an emergency meeting, this time not in the pristine glass clubhouse, but in Mrs. Walker's living room. Someone brought cookies. Someone else made coffee. There were no microphones, no speeches, no smug smiles. Just tired faces in the sense that maybe, finally, the nightmare was ending. We voted to dissolve the HOA entirely. Unanimous? The county appointed a temporary trustee to oversee the legal fallout, but no one cared about the technicalities. We just wanted our peace back. In the following weeks, restitution began. Fines were reversed, liens lifted, stolen equity refunded through seized accounts. Alicia kept reporting, her updates turning the story into a statewide reckoning. But for me, it wasn't about headlines anymore. It was about walking outside one morning, hearing the soft hiss of sprinklers, smelling fresh-cut grass, and realizing that, for the first time in months, I didn't have to look over my shoulder. The climax wasn't just Greg's downfall. It was the moment the entire illusion collapsed, the moment everyone finally saw that the thing they'd feared for so long was just a few desperate people clinging to power. A week after his arrest, Greg tried to call me from the county jail. I didn't answer, but his voicemail came through anyway. "You think you won?" he said, his voice low, bitter. "You didn't win, Daniel. You just lit the fuse." I deleted the message without saving it, because the truth was, he was right in one way. What happened in Maple Hollow wasn't unique. It was a spark, one that would spread. People were starting to question their HOAs, demanding transparency, freedom, fairness. And that was something Greg could never stop. On the morning the court officially nullified the lien on my home, I walked to the end of the street. The rain had finally cleared, and the sun hit the wet pavement like glass. Kids were playing again. Neighbors waved. Mrs. Walker's chimes sang in the breeze. I looked down at my reflection in the puddle, tired, older, but free, and in that reflection I thought about everything it had cost to get here. Peace, safety, trust. All of it built back, one small act at a time. As I turned to go back home, a delivery truck rolled by. The side of it read, "Maple Hollow Maintenance Services." Different logo, different color scheme, same subtle smugness. I watched it disappear down the street, that uneasy feeling stirring again. Not fear this time, but awareness, because that's how it starts. A flyer in the mailbox, a meeting in a clubhouse, a friendly voice talking about community harmony, and if no one questions it, if everyone just signs, then history repeats itself. But not here, not again, not on my street. The morning after Greg Stanton's arrest, Maple Hollow felt like a ghost town. The pristine sidewalks were still lined with identical mailboxes, the hedges still perfectly trimmed, but something invisible had broken. The control, the silent hierarchy that once ruled the neighborhood like a religion, was gone. I woke up to quiet. Not the kind of quiet that presses on your chest, heavy and suffocating, but the kind that hums with relief. For months, every sound, a knock, a car door, a clipboard snap, had made my stomach twist. Now the world outside my window felt still, free. When I stepped onto the porch, I half expected to see another violation notice taped to my door. But there was nothing, just a few fallen leaves, the scent of damp earth, and the faint laughter of a child somewhere down the block. The news had spread faster than anyone expected. Greg's arrest had triggered something like a chain reaction. One HOA after another across the county began to unravel. By noon, the Maple Hollow Community Forum, which Greg had run with an iron grip, was flooded with angry posts from residents. Screenshots of forged signatures, photos of fabricated violation letters, a spreadsheet leaked by one of Greg's former board members showing how fines had been funneled through dummy maintenance accounts. By evening, every illusion of control had been burned to the ground, and in that chaos, people began to talk again. Really talk. Neighbors who hadn't made eye contact in years were standing in driveways comparing stories. Tracy, who once bragged about her position on the board, now stood outside apologizing to the very people she'd written up. Mrs. Walker brought cookies to my house, trembling as she said, "We should have believed you sooner." I didn't know what to say. I just smiled, thanked her, and watched her walk back home, the late afternoon light catching the silver in her hair. A week later, the county investigator came by. A quiet man with a calm face and a voice like sandpaper. He asked if I had copies of the emails, financial statements, and the anonymous tips I'd gathered. I handed him a flash drive. He nodded. "You've done a lot of our work for us, Mr. Brooks." It felt strange hearing that, Mr. Brooks, like I was just another citizen again, not a target. By the time the state attorney general's office filed charges, Greg wasn't the only one in trouble. Janet Wells, the HOA treasurer, was indicted for fraud and embezzlement. 2 board members fled town, and Frank Mercer, the neighbor who had once smirked as he took photos of my lawn, agreed to testify in exchange for immunity. It turned out Greg's web stretched far beyond Maple Hollow. He'd been using HOA funds to purchase distressed homes through a network of shell corporations, flipping them for personal profit. The same bylaws he'd enforced so ruthlessly had become his weapon, and his undoing. But justice, as satisfying as it was, didn't happen overnight. For months, the neighborhood became a kind of open wound, exposed, healing, but still tender. We had to face what we'd become under Greg's rule, compliant, fearful, disconnected. There were arguments at town halls. Some people wanted to keep the HOA, but reform it. Others wanted to burn it down completely. I didn't say much at first. I just listened to the anger, the guilt, the shame. Then, one night, during a community meeting in the old clubhouse, now stripped of its banners and framed Award for Excellence plaques, I stood up. "I think what broke this place wasn't Greg," I said. "It was our silence. Every time we said, 'It's just a rule,' or 'It's not my problem,' we gave him power. We built his throne for him." The room was quiet. "So maybe the answer isn't another HOA," I continued. "Maybe it's remembering that this isn't a corporation. It's a neighborhood. And neighbors don't need contracts to do the right thing." When I finished, there was a long pause. Then Mrs. Patel, the woman who once filed a noise complaint about my daughter's piano lessons, stood and started clapping. The rest followed. That night, we voted unanimously. Maple Hollow Homeowners Association was officially dissolved. For the first time in decades, the residents of Maple Hollow owned their homes and their peace, free and clear. The months that followed were a strange mix of rebuilding and rediscovery. The old HOA office, a glass-fronted building that once symbolized fear, became a community center. Emily and I helped paint the walls a bright, hopeful yellow. Kids played outside without the constant hum of surveillance drones Greg had installed for security. And slowly, laughter began to replace whispers. The news coverage kept coming. Alicia's story went national. A full documentary series exposing the dark underbelly of HOAs across the country. I watched the premiere alone in my living room. When my face appeared on screen, recounting the night of the raid, I felt that same knot in my chest, but this time it wasn't fear. It was closure. Greg eventually took a plea deal, 5 years in federal prison, restitution, and a lifetime ban from holding any fiduciary position. The judge's final words echoed through every HOA boardroom across the state. Power without accountability is not governance. It's extortion. Those words became a kind of anthem. Even after the chaos faded, people continued to reach out. Homeowners from other neighborhoods, small towns, even other states. They sent messages, letters, videos, all saying the same thing. Your story gave us courage. That more than anything made it worth it. Emily and I started planting a garden in the backyard that spring, the same yard that had once sparked a $500 fine over a non-compliant fence. We built the fence back ourselves, exactly how we wanted it. Uneven, a little rustic, and completely ours. Sometimes, when the sun set and the wind carried the smell of fresh soil, I'd sit on the porch and think about how close I'd come to losing it all. There was one day in particular, mid-June, when the mail arrived with a thick white envelope. For a second, my heart stopped. Old habits die hard. But when I opened it, it wasn't a fine. It was a letter from the county clerk. Property line cleared. Title fully restored. It was over, truly over. I framed that letter and hung it by the front door, not as a trophy, but as a reminder of what silence almost cost me. As the months rolled on, Maple Hollow changed in ways I couldn't have imagined. The street that once looked like a showroom now looked alive. People painted their houses in warm colors. Someone built a small library box near the cul-de-sac. Neighbors started helping each other fix roofs and fences instead of reporting them. There were barbecues again. Laughter carried through open windows. It wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was real. And in that imperfection, we found something better than order. We found community. One afternoon, Alicia stopped by to drop off the latest court documents. She stood on my porch, squinting in the sun. "You know, this place looks different," she said. "It feels different," I replied. She smiled. "Funny how one person standing up can change an entire town." I thought about that long after she left, because the truth was, I hadn't done it alone. I'd just been the first one to stop.